Tonight on KQED Newsroom, special guest Republican strategist Matt Shupe discusses what Governor Newsom's decisive recall victory means for the GOP in California. Plus, our panel of political reporters dissect this week's news. And we take a stroll at the lovely Land's End. Coming to you from KQED headquarters in San Francisco, this Friday, September 17th, 2021. Hello and welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm your host, Priya David Clemens. Let's jump into California's top stories this week with our Friday Five. The eyes of the nation were on California on Tuesday as Gavin Newsom defended his seat in the recall election and swept the vote to remain governor of California.
I want to focus on what we said yes to as a state. We said yes to science. We said yes to vaccines. We said yes to ending this pandemic.
While President Joe Biden was in California the day before to rally support for Governor Newsom, he received a briefing on our massive wildfires and spoke to the media after surveying damage from the Calder fire.
Homes, precious memories destroyed, air quality degraded, local economy stopped in its tracks, and nearly 200 people in the area forced to live in shelters.
Despite mass layoffs caused by the pandemic, a new census report shows the number of Californians living in poverty has actually dropped by a couple of points to 15%, perhaps due to government stimulus support over the past year. However, we still have the highest poverty rate of any state in the nation. In better news, California has the lowest 7-day coronavirus case rate in America. The news comes as portions of the state strengthen vaccine requirements. Los Angeles County, for example, will begin requiring proof of vaccination for people visiting indoor bars, wineries, and nightclubs. And Jeopardy has a new host, 2 of them actually. This week, the game show named previous winner Ken Jennings and actor Mayim Bialik as co-hosts for the season. This follows the passing of longtime host Alex Trebek last year. And that's this week's Friday Five. Time now to talk all things politics. It's back to business for California Governor Gavin Newsom this week, now that the recall is behind him. That means turning to the bills that have landed on his desk since the legislature wrapped its regular session last Friday. Meanwhile, thousands of state employees and healthcare workers around California have already filed for exemptions from President Biden's new vaccine mandate. To chew on these stories and more, I'm joined by KQED politics and government correspondent Guy Marzorati and Politico's senior writer Carla Marinucci. Hello and welcome to you both.
Hi, good to be with you.
Here. Carla, we're going to get into recall politics in a few minutes, but let's start with discussing some news that just came out. Mayor London Breed visited a nightclub this week, and pictures have emerged showing her in close quarters to others, indoors, without a mask on, in violation of her own public health orders. What sort of response are you seeing to this?
All right, you're seeing the tabloids just picking up on this big time. You're seeing the conservative media, Newsmax, Breitbart picking up on this. The lesson here is public officials do not get a pass on vaccine and COVID mandates. And London Breed should know better than anyone. She had headlines come at her when she visited the French Laundry after Governor Newsom. And now, again, this is just another problem. The rules for thee and not for me are the headlines today. And, I understand public officials have to have a private life, but they don't have a private life in today's era of social media. She was caught on tape. It's yet another problem.
So, Guy, how much do you think this is really going to impact her? In some ways, the Democrats seem a bit untouchable right now with Governor Newsom's victory. Do you think this incident is going to stick? Will it negatively impact Mayor Breed?
Well, I think given where we are in the course of this pandemic and just the local political makeup of San Francisco, I don't think this approaches anything close to a French Laundry 2.0. But I do think, look, hypocrisy is always a vulnerability for politicians. And you can see that even in some of the pre-election polling of the recall. Berkeley looked at arguments supporting the recall of Newsom. The one that got the highest support was that his own mandates and his own proclamations about COVID, that he didn't follow them. So I think even given the mandate that this election gives Newsom and his policies on COVID, there still is always this vulnerability of acting apart from the mandates that you've set forward.
Well, we'll see where this story goes, if anywhere. Carla, Governor Newsom won by a bigger margin than when he won the governor's seat in 2018. Does this seal of approval give him the ability to take on specific policies or programs or procedures that he didn't have before?
I mean, it certainly gives him the wind at his back. At this point, we have about 9 million of the 13 million votes cast. 2/3 of them supported Newsom staying in office. He's gotten some very strong mandates. We're finding out from Latino voters, for instance, that was a bit of worrisome. Younger voters coming forward. Newsom is still going to have challenges. He's still going to have Republicans out there hitting him on issues like the uptick in crime, like homelessness, and affordability of housing. He has said, "I hear you," to those who voted yes. He has said, "I'm listening to you." But the question is, has he heard them? Will he change any of his ways on some of the some mistakes that brought in this recall in the first place and some of the issues? He's going to get pressure from the left as well as the right. The left wanting more health care, more affordable health care, more housing issues, more protection from eviction. So he's going to be pulled in both ways. But the fact is, looking at the Republican Party going forward, it doesn't look like he has to worry about any serious challenger coming up in 2022. Latest poll from the IGS shows neither Kevin Faulconer nor Larry Elder nor Kevin Kiley, Don Cox, any of the Republican replacement candidates have any kind of traction against Newsom going into 2022.
And yet I bet we're going to be hearing from some of them in the months to come. Guy, we obviously know the result of this recall election, but officials have hundreds of thousands of ballots that they're still processing. What trends are you watching for as the vote continues?
Right. As of Thursday night, roughly 3 million votes left to be counted in the state. I actually think this lead could grow for Newsom. You look at some of the counties, particularly in the Central Valley, he's running behind where Biden was in 2020. I think there's room for him to grow this lead. And it just, again, is worth restating the damage that former President Donald Trump has done here in California to the Republican Party when it comes to voting trends. The Republican Party here used to dominate early mail voting. That's gone largely due to these unfounded claims the former president put forward about vote by mail. And it's really forced the GOP to put all their eggs into this election day basket. And so once again, you're seeing the trends that you saw in 2020. The early vote dominated by Democrats, Republicans catching up a little bit on election day itself, and then now these later ballots turning leftward.
For either of you, are there any pockets of information that we've learned from this vote that are a vulnerability that Republicans might want to exploit in the next election cycle, or that Democrats might want to pay attention to?
I mean, I think one of the areas that Democrats will want to pay attention to is the gender gap, the significant gender gap that developed in this contest, with 66% of women saying they were going to vote against the recall, in part because of Larry Elder, his comments on abortion, his comments on women in the workplace. If the Republicans go forward and don't address this issue, I think down ballot, they've got to be worried about the gender gap. And that's a kind of a national trend, too, when you talk about Biden and on the national scene going into 2022 House races. So that's one thing to watch that came out of this recall, significant gender gap in Newsom's favor.
And Guy, anything you'd like to add here?
Yeah, I think on the Newsom side, look, I'll call it organizational humility. The way they approached this campaign was not by saying, here, we're going to build a no on the recall headquarters in every town. They really thought, let's find organizations that are already doing the work on the ground, getting the vote out. And this is very similar to how Democrats approached the 2020 election in Georgia, which is let's find nonprofits that are already doing voter education, get out the vote work, and partner with them. I think this groundwork has been laid in 2021, and there's a lot of contact that they've made with voters now going into another election year in 2022.
All right, well, let's turn the corner here a little bit and, Carla, talk about President Biden, his mandates for vaccinations for federal employees and large employers. How is that mandate being received here in California?
Well, look, I mean, this is one area where Governor Newsom rode to success big time in the recall based on COVID. That was the two lessons that the Newsom campaign said they came out of this. Identify the villain, that's COVID. Identify the stakes, life or death. And that is how Newsom played it. And that is how Joe Biden is playing it in some ways. We know that in California, voters strongly supported Newsom's job approval going into this recall by about 18 points. 2/3 of them supported the kind of mandates, vaccine and mask mandates that Joe Biden is calling for. So I think that is why what happened in California could very well be a roadmap for Biden, for Nancy Pelosi, and the Democrats going into the 2022 and 2024 elections.
Carla, I want to stay with you for a minute. Newsom has until October 10th to either sign or veto a slew of bills that were passed by the legislature. Yesterday, he signed several housing initiatives. Tell us about the importance of the housing piece in particular.
This is huge, Priya, because this is the one issue that he came into the governor's seat promising more affordable housing. It is an issue that affects every community in California. So the governor got right into it on Thursday by signing a pair of bills that basically initiate a major shift away from single family zoning. One allows duplexes and lot splits to enable up to 4 units on currently single home lots. That's a very big deal in California. Another would remove sort of barriers to local government rezoning for up to 10 units. These are both effectively ending single-family only zoning in much of the state. And a lot of people say this is a critical turning point in the housing war, the ability of Newsom to deliver some more affordable housing. It will be, some of these will be controversial. Remember, SB 50 was a very big, Scott Wiener's effort, a very big and very controversial effort. Not in my backyard, a lot of people said, but right now, these measures are game changers, a lot of people say.
All right, Guy, what other bills are you going to be watching as they come to the governor's desk?
Well, coming out of this election, I'll definitely have my eyes on a bill to make universal vote by mail permanent in California. We've had it the last couple elections, but there's an effort on Newsom's desk to make it kind of the default, keep sending every registered voter a ballot. We've seen it doesn't always increase turnout in all cases, but it's definitely something that Californians, quite frankly, have gotten used to these past 2 elections, and we'll likely see it going forward. And then secondly, I think Newsom really has an opportunity to make his mark on police reform. We've seen him sign legislation in the past on use of force, and there's a controversial bill on his desk now dealing with officer decertification, identifying those officers who have done wrong in one community, not letting them go to another force. I think this is an area where the governor, just in his first term, can make a real mark.
So, Carla, let's go back to the recall for one last question. Democrats in the legislature are eyeing a handful of potential changes to California's recall process. What are those changes, and how likely are they to come to pass?
Look, with this recall costing about $300 million, they're saying California has the lowest bar in the country. It's time to change that. They're suggesting perhaps increasing the number of signatures required to get on the ballot more than 12%, ending paid signature gatherers, perhaps requiring that the governor be guilty of some kind of criminal conduct or malfeasance before a recall is called, allowing for the governor to be on that replacement list of candidates, and maybe a line of succession, having the lieutenant governor take over if a governor is recalled. So this process is popular with Californians, but the feeling is the process has to be reformed. Otherwise, California could unseat a very unpopular governor under the current system.
All right. Carla Marinucci with Politico, Guy Marzorati with KQED. Thank you both for joining us.
My pleasure.
As the Republican Party is taking stock of the recall election, some are asking the hard questions, like the ones in this tweet from a lead Republican communications strategist. What will we change moving forward? How will we adapt? We cannot continue to do the same thing over and over and over again, hoping that maybe next time it'll be different. We're not even fighting the last war. We're fighting the last century's war. Joining us now is the author of that tweet, Matt Shupe, the chair of the Contra Costa County Republican Party and a leading voice on Republican strategy in California. Matt Shupe, welcome to the show.
Hi, Priya. Thanks for having me today.
So when you say Republicans were fighting last century's war, you're talking about using old tactics. And I'm hoping you can unpack that for us. What were those old strategies and why didn't they work?
Yeah, I mean, we're using a lot of old strategies and tactics. We're starting to adopt some of the newer ones like ballot harvesting and peer-to-peer texting, but I don't think that we're doing it fast enough. And I think that there's a lot of other things like social media influencers, and ads through Instagram and a lot of other things that are starting to be done, but just not being done effectively and robustly as they need to, along with a lot of other things like how we motivate people, how we get out to vote. One of the big problems that we had this year was there was a lot of concern about voter fraud, and it suppressed our vote. And that needs to stop, and we need to address that, and we need to work to make sure people feel secure in the elections. But there's a lot of things that we need to do, how we communicate to voters and how we message and who those messengers are, and building out surrogate networks. The message is just as important as the messenger. And I've really come to believe that the Republicans and Democrats are essentially two different cultures now with two different vocabularies. And, we need to learn to speak that language and do it effectively, which I think is something we're still struggling to do.
Do you have any examples of that when you say we speak different languages? What does that mean? And how would Republicans start to speak more clearly or in a way that is more effective to the majority of voters in this state, which are not Republicans, who are Democrats?
Yeah, I think, you see a lot of generic polling and they ask, like, what's the most important issue to you? And they'll say infrastructure, jobs in the economy, crime. But you ask, a Bernie Sanders supporter in San Francisco who says, their top issue is jobs in the economy. And you ask a small business owner in Fresno, jobs in the economy is their number one issue. But their policy, preferences are wildly different. But to a campaign that just looks at these generic polling results, they go, oh, wow, I need to go talk about jobs in the economy. And, they don't really know how to adapt it that well to the people they need to persuade. And speaking in that language, the Bernie Sanders supporter is going to want an increased minimum wage, more time off and services for young mothers and things like that. Whereas the business owner is going to want reduced taxes and easier employment laws and things like that. But they're two totally different sets of issues. The same thing with, infrastructure. Republicans probably want, more parking, bigger freeways, things like that. Whereas to Democrats, they might want more bike lanes and light rail and high-speed rail and things. So, the answers look the same, but the real policy prescriptions are wildly different.
Well, this vote seemed to show that ideologically, most Californians support the Democratic agenda. So is it really just about having a different strategy, or does there need to be a shift in the message, in the ideology the Republican candidates put forward?
I actually don't think that's the case entirely. I think that they support the Democratic, platform right now because the Republicans have done a pretty bad job at offering their own. For the last 10, 20 years, we've been the party of no. And we've really done a bad job, if not failed, at offering our own alternative aspirational ideas on how to solve problems. One example is the wildfire. It's very easy to come out there and criticize the government and the governor of the failings that have happened there. But what we really should be doing is saying, here is the Republican plan to avoid this and to stop the wildfires or prevent them. And this is what we would be doing differently, and sell that to the Californians. Because right now, Californians are pretty much presented with a bad plan or no plan. And people, I think, rather choose the bad one that they know rather than the non-existent one they don't know. And that really falls on us. Like, we need to become the party of ideas again and aspirational, accomplishments, and not just oppose everything the Democrats do.
Well, Matt, I mean, this is some very honest talk from you. So let me ask you another hard question. Was the recall effort a mistake? The victory is so decisive. It seems to have only made Governor Newsom stronger, right? To have reinforced his decisions as governor. So was this a mistake to take it to the mat?
I mean, I think, afterwards it's easy for pundits to say that it's a mistake, but I don't have any regret in supporting it. And I don't think it was a mistake. To be honest, I thought it was ours to lose. I think that Gavin Newsom had a very strong chance of losing the recall several months ago. I think in the last couple of months, it became pretty clear that he was going to win. So I think that we messed up the opportunity, but at the same time, he also had massive advantages. A few things that people aren't talking about is the governor could actually raise unlimited amounts of funds. There was no campaign contribution limits, but I thought that the opportunity was there and probably greater than, it had been in 2018 and potentially even in 2022. So I think we I think we need to do a lot of introspection and learn, like I said, what my tweet said, how to adapt and overcome this and learn from our failures.
But when you look at the math in California and you look at the fact that you've got half of the electorate is Democratic, a quarter Republican, a quarter independent, does there really seem like a way for Republican candidates to break through and to get into leadership in government again?
Yeah, I think they need to be pragmatic and charismatic. And I think that people do want to check and balance in their government. Right now, the Democrats are not just a majority. They're not even a super majority. They're a mega majority. They have veto override in the state legislature. They have all constitutional offices. And I think that there are a lot of Californians that are just unhappy with this. With the status quo and with the homelessness and the wildfires and a lot of these issues. But again, we need a candidate that can connect to people, that is charismatic and has an actual aspirational policy plan that a majority of Californians can rally behind. And I don't think we've really seen that yet.
One of the issues that I've heard raised often in the last few days is that Republicans generally like to speak against government waste, and yet the party that doesn't want to waste money just spent $300 million, taxpayer dollars, on this recall effort that seemingly went nowhere.
Yeah, I think that's a really obnoxious line of attack. First of all, this is democracy. This is the minority of, being able to hold the majority accountable and in check. Getting 1.7 million signatures during a pandemic is no easy feat. And so I think that democracy is good. I mean, this, that criticism is coming from the party that, tried to impeach President Trump twice, knowing that he was not going to be removed. One other thing is the policies that the Democrats enacted recently, like, vote by mail for every voter in California, raised the cost of that election as well. And also, in contrast to the $30 billion in EDD fraud and all the waste that's gone into high-speed rail and everything, had we, been able to recall the governor and put in a Republican governor and maybe stop some of that bleeding of money, it actually would have been a hell of a deal.
So let's talk about those Republican challengers to Governor Newsom. There were several career politicians, one of them for whom you worked as a communications consultant, Kevin Faulconer. But the one that really garnered support was not a politician. It was the radio host Larry Elder. And I want to listen to some of his comments during his concession speech.
Okay.
But ultimately, I decided to run because I felt that I could do something about the crime. I could do something about the homelessness. I could do something about the fact that California has now hit $800,000 average price of a home. That's 150% above the national average. Outrageous because of the stranglehold the environmental extremists have had over Gavin Newsom and have had over Sacramento.
So tell us why those messages resonated so much with conservatives in the state.
I like to draw a parallel with Bernie Sanders. Democrats in California, Bernie Sanders won the presidential primary in California, but, national Democrats know that Bernie Sanders is not electable nationally, and that Republicans would be able to raise a tremendous amount of money running against him and would be able to win the House and the Senate and defeat him in the presidency. But they really like what he would have to say. It's the same thing with Larry Elder. The base really likes hearing what he has to say. He's going to solve crime. He's going to reduce the cost of housing, and he's going to make a difference in Sacramento. It's easy for Republicans to support that message. Unfortunately, it doesn't translate that well to California's independent and Democratic voters. And that is something that our base needs to sort of realize and move forward with, that the Democrats have done. Joe Biden was nobody's first choice in the primary, but he came through and the people understood that he was electable and he won because of it. There was actually criticism for Joe Biden, that he wasn't going to the California Democratic Party convention in San Francisco during the primary. And I actually said that was smart for him because he's avoiding the more radical side of his party. It's the same thing for, Larry Elder and the Republicans, that, again, the base likes to hear what he has to say, but we need to take our, when we're outnumbered 2-1, we need to find a messenger and a message that appeals to as many Californians as possible.
All right, well, speaking of unity, in his victory speech, Governor Newsom made some comments about Californians coming together. Let's listen.
I think we owe our kids a deeper sense of respect, and all of us as adults a responsibility to disregard this false separateness. We're so much more in common as a state and a nation than we give ourselves credit for.
Matt, unfortunately, this is going to be the last answer. We just have a few more seconds together. But what do you take from Governor Newsom's call to come together, which is a typical sort of thing to say after you've won a political battle?
I do agree that a lot of Californians have a lot of things in common. We all love this state. I was born and raised here, and people love California. However, I think that's kind of hypocritical of him, because him and his campaign have been some of the most divisive political rhetoric in this state in recent memory. His entire campaign was focused about going after Republicans and calling it the Republican recall and saying how Republicans were going to destroy the state. It's really hard for Republicans then to say, yeah, let's all come together and he likes us too. Mm-hmm. I have a couple prescriptions that he could do to start that process, which is to end the state of emergency for the pandemic. And I think that our state has over 80% vaccination rate. I don't think that we need the mandates. We're the only state that just dropped out of the, CDC's, I think, like highest spread rate. We're doing well on COVID. We don't need these mandates, and, we don't need this emergency order anymore. Right. And I think it would go a long way for him to end those.
Matt Shupe, a lead Republican communications strategist in California. Thanks for your time, Matt.
Thanks for having me and hope to be back.
One of our favorite things to do is to connect with you, our viewers. Tonight, we'd like to introduce one member of our shared community, Jordan Wilson. Talking with him sent us on a visit to Land's End in San Francisco for tonight's edition of Something Beautiful.
Hello, my name is Jordan Wilson and I'm a longtime viewer and listener of KQED. My family has been in San Francisco for 5 generations and we all love to visit Land's End. My grandma would go and watch the Golden Gate Bridge being built as a child, and I still love to visit today. I visit for the beauty, the scenery, and to escape from the outside world.
Thank you, Jordan. And if you'd like to share your favorite place with us too, then please reach out. KQED Newsroom is on Twitter and Facebook, or email us at knr@kqed.org. You can reach me on Twitter at Priya D. Clemens. We would absolutely love to hear from you and perhaps feature your story in the future. That's the end of our show for tonight. We'll see you right back here next Friday night. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.